lines and God knows what. I wish to God Ireland would just call it as it is and tell the truth. It's just too bad.
Come on, Deputy Clare Jail is next.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. There's absolutely no doubt about it that the abject failure of this government to behave as a sovereign nation and put its stamp on a different type of foreign policy for the EU is incredibly disappointing for so many people. I mean, it is a fact now that the EU is complicit in the fact that we have the world being much more unsafe and unstable than it has been at any time previously. And in fact, not only is Europe turning a blind eye, but is actually profiting from that. It's quite clear from the Minister's statement early on that the Council meeting spent a lot of time looking and dealing with the so-called problem of refugees. But I'd have to say that the reality is it's the refugees that have a European Union problem rather than the other way around. I mean, we all know the situation of the record-breaking year that it was for people smugglers in Europe, making about 5.5 billion from exploiting the misery of people fleeing from war. We know that 90% actually of refugees who manage to get to Europe do so with the help of a smuggler, if you could call it that, being exploited to the tune of 3,000 to 5,500 euros. We know the reports of the abuses, the kidnappings, the sinking of boats and the horrors that they endure on those journeys. But there's no secret about that horror. And the people making the journey know that that's what they're putting themselves at risk for at a price of their whole life's savings. So why are they doing it? They know the risks, and the reasons why they're doing it is that the reality is that what they're escaping from is even worse. And we have to say that. Their families been murdered, been killed, their homes been annihilated, starving to death in instances. And this is a consequence of Western wars and invasions. That's why they're fleeing. And, you know, it's also a consequence that the EU has set itself up with a system that people cannot claim asylum in Europe without reaching Europe first. And there's no other way of doing it except illegally and putting themselves at the hands of smugglers and so on. And that is because of the points made previously by many organisations of the failure of the EU to operate a humanitarian visa system. And I'd have to say that the EU's response, the so-called war on smugglers, even at one stage going to launch military strikes on smugglers, is going to be just as ineffective as the war on drugs and the war on terror, and the victims will end up being re-victimised again by that. And I think it's really disgusting, actually, that the EU has moved back to a position of concentrating its efforts on preventing and discouraging people from attempting to get into EU territory rather than dealing with issues like a humanitarian visa issue. Why can't this be done? And has the Irish government raised this at the meetings? There could be small consular outposts created outside the European Union in countries like Libya or wherever. The routes that migrants take obviously change, but the posts could be moved around with them, where people could be assessed, have their application for asylum, be issued with a humanitarian visa and then get a boat or a plane into the EU rather than having to venture forward illegally. I think not only the issue of humanitarian visas, but the Dublin regulation itself has to go. And we should be championing that. I think it's been really disgusting provision, to be honest, which the Irish government has, I suppose, milked a little bit. I think as well the Irish government should be pushing for an end to the closure of land borders, because these are far safer for people than crossing the Mediterranean in a leaky boat. And I think we should be championing that, and I'd be interested to hear what was said about that. But, you know, dealing with the people who end up here is only one thing, and we could be doing a lot better in regard to that. But the key issue is what are we doing as a neutral state to raise the issue of Western military interventions, which is the cause, the ultimate cause, for the scale of the crisis that's unfolding now. Has this government pushed for an end to airstrikes, pushed for an end to interventions? Have you raised the issues that these things need to be debated? And if you haven't done it, Why haven't you done it? Because we should be doing it as a neutral country. We should be raising the despicable role of Turkey, which has facilitated massively the growth of ISIS in terms of its own opportunistic strategic goals vis-à-vis Syria, and indeed the plight of the Kurdish population there. So I'd like to know why you're not doing it. I think I know the answer, and Deputy Wallace has highlighted it. It's because you're putting economic interests, trade deals and deals with these people above the human rights of others, and it's just not good enough. It's not in the interests of Irish people, it's not in the interests of people who support our neutrality, and you really should be doing better rather than being an Uncle Tom to the EU, who ultimately are playing that role to US imperialism.